Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. The following is a collection of two compelling accounts of alleged alien encounters that offer detailed descriptions of otherworldly beings and events. Accompany Will Fergeson on his 1980 sailing trip as he encounters a massive city of lights hovering next to his boat, and join Kian Amini in his Ontario dorm room during a startling nighttime visitation in 2008. Both experiences challenged the witnesses' perceptions of reality and left them with lingering questions about what it was they encountered. City of Lights. In the summer of 1980, Will Fergeson's seemingly ordinary sailing trip from Bermuda to New England with his wife would lead to an extraordinary close encounter with an otherworldly presence that would forever change him. It was approximately 3 a.m. when Will was jolted from his sleep by an unfamiliar humming sound. Intrigued and slightly alarmed, he ascended the companionway ladder to investigate. What he witnessed next defied explanation and would etch itself into his memory for decades to come. Off the starboard side of his boat, Will beheld what he could only describe as a city of lights. This massive, well-defined structure hovered above the water, seeming to defy the laws of physics as we know them. The object possessed multiple levels, each adorned with an array of lights that seemed to emanate from within its core. As Will stood transfixed, the phenomenal craft began to change. The light emanating from it shifted in hue and intensity, accompanied by an alteration in the pitch of its hum. The frequency of the vibration also intensified, and Will reported feeling it resonate within his own body, a sensation both alien and oddly familiar. What happened next pushed the boundaries of human experience even further. Will recounts feeling overwhelming emotion, with tears streaming down his face. Although curiously, he reports these tears feeling extremely cool on his skin. In a moment that seemed to defy gravity, he found himself suspended in air, enveloped in what he described as a column of light and energy distinct from the surrounding space. In this transitional state of being enshrouded by diffuse light and persistent vibration, Will suddenly experienced a slow shift in his movement, as if being accelerated. He likens the sensation to gradually putting the foot down on the accelerator pedal. He then describes himself slowly beginning to move towards the craft, eventually passing through a threshold, marking his entry into its interior. Once inside, Will experienced a profound shift in his sense of self. He no longer felt like the same person who had been standing on the deck of his sailboat moments earlier. He was no longer Will. The interior of the craft was populated by tall, translucent beings, estimated to be between 7 and 8 feet in height. Strange, however, was that one of these beings seemed to recognise him, seeming to offer a deeper care and attention than the others. These entities, despite their otherworldly appearance, possessed a beauty that Will struggled to articulate. He described them as having a bluish tint, with forms that were more suggested than clearly defined, as their limbs and extremities were indistinct. As Will attempted to process the scene before him, he found himself overcome with emotion. The beauty he perceived in these beings seemed to transcend human aesthetic ideals, touching something deep within his psyche. When he looked into these entities, he was met with a profound sense of recognition and connection. The being's eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to hold depths of wisdom and understanding beyond human comprehension. Will's encounter continued as he found himself drawn deeper into the extraordinary experience. He reported feeling a sense of timelessness, as if the normal rules of progression no longer applied. The interior of the craft also seemed to shift and change, defying the logic of three-dimensional geometry. Spaces opened and closed, revealing glimpses of forms far beyond anything he had ever seen or imagined. Communication with the beings was unlike anything Will had ever experienced before. There were no words exchanged, no sounds uttered, yet he felt a flood of information and emotion coursing through his mind. Ideas, concepts and images flashed before his mind's eye, conveying complex messages that he struggled to fully comprehend. As the encounter continued, Will became aware of a sense of purpose behind the event. Though he couldn't articulate it clearly, he felt that these beings were imparting something crucial, perhaps a warning or a message of hope for humanity's future. The emotional impact was overwhelming, leaving him simultaneously elated and deeply unsettled. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the experience came to an end. Will found himself back on his sailboat, the vast city of lights receding into the distance before vanishing entirely. Will's story, while extraordinary, is not unique among reported extraterrestrial encounters. It bears similarity to other accounts of close encounters, particularly in the described sensations of timelessness, telepathic communication, and the profound emotional impact on the witness. Skeptics might argue that Will's experience could be attributed to a vivid dream, hallucination, or the effects of isolation at sea. However, the consistency and detail of his account, along with the lasting impact it had on his life, suggests an experience that goes beyond mere imagination or misperception. The Newmarket Incident. In the quiet town of Newmarket, Ontario, nestled in the heart of Canada, an extraordinary event unfolded in the fall of 2008. This is the story of Kian Amini, a young Iranian international student who found himself face to face with the unknown in an encounter that would challenge his perception of reality and leave him questioning the boundaries of our universe. Kian had recently arrived in Canada, a world away from his home in Iran. Adjusting to life at a boarding school in Newmarket, he shared a modest dormitory room with a Chinese student known to sleep through even the loudest disturbances. Little did Kian know that on one fateful night, while his roommate slept soundly, he would experience an otherworldly visitation. The night began like any other. Kian, the last to go to bed, completed his evening routine and entered the locked room. The windows were sealed against the cool autumn air, and his roommate was already lost in dreams. Kian settled into bed, facing the wall, his mind drifting towards sleep. Suddenly, 3 distinct knocks pierced the silence. Initially dismissing the sound, Kian rolled over, his eyes reflexively opening. What he saw next would be etched into his memory forever. There, barely a metre from his bed, stood a being that defied explanation. It resembled the classic depiction of a grey alien, but with notable differences. Its skin was paler, almost ghostly in the dim light. Large, almond-shaped eyes dominated its face, yet they appeared to be squinting, as if adjusting to the darkness of the room. The entity stood no taller than a metre, its slender form a stark contrast to the familiar shapes of the dormitory furniture. As Kian's eyes widened in disbelief, the creature slowly turned its head. Their gazes locked, and in that instant, Kian felt an overwhelming force take hold of him. His eyes slammed shut involuntarily, and his body became rigid, paralysed by an unseen power. For what seemed like an eternity, but was likely only around 15 seconds, Kian struggled against this invisible restraint. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline fueled by primal fear, Kian broke free from the paralysis. He bolted upright, a cry of shock escaping his lips as he frantically reached for the bedside light. The warm glow illuminated the room, revealing nothing. The alien had vanished without a trace. The door remained locked, the window sealed. His roommate slumbered on, oblivious to the extraordinary event that had just transpired. Heart pounding, Kian spent the next 20 minutes in a state of heightened alertness. He searched every corner of the room, even venturing into the hallway, but found no evidence of the intruder. The dormitory's elevated position made access from the outside nearly impossible without a ladder. As the initial shock began to subside, Kian reluctantly returned to bed, his mind racing with questions. Just as he was beginning to convince himself it had been a vivid hallucination, 3 more knocks shattered the silence. This time, Kian's alert mind registered a crucial detail. The sound came from the window glass. Without hesitation, he leapt from the bed, switched on the light, and rushed to the window. But once again, he was met with nothing but the dark, empty night. No strange lights, no hovering craft, no pale alien form retreating into the shadows. In the years following the incident, Kian has analysed his experience. He's certain it wasn't a case of pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon of perceiving familiar patterns when none exist. The entity he saw was too distinct, too three-dimensional to be a trick of the mind. Kian has also ruled out sleep paralysis, a condition he would come to experience in later years. The paralysis he felt during the encounter was instantaneous and total, which was unlike the gradual onset and partial awareness typical of sleep paralysis episodes. Moreover, the speed with which he regained control of his body doesn't align with the lingering effects often associated with sleep paralysis. The possibility of a prank by fellow students has been thoroughly dismissed. The room's layout, with its sparse furnishings and lack of hiding spaces, coupled with Kian's habit of always locking the door, makes such an explanation implausible. As Kian recounts the events of that night, he often wonders about the entity's purpose. Was it there for him or for his soundly sleeping roommate? The alien's position near his roommate's bed raises intriguing questions about its intentions. Curiously, Kian's roommate was transferred to a different room shortly after the new year and replaced by a fellow Iranian student due to conflicts he was having with his former roommates. The encounter in Newmarket permanently changed Kian's perspective on life. Though brief, the image of the pale, squinting entity has remained vivid in his mind. The inexplicable nature of the event, from the paralysing gaze to the mysterious knocks on the window, continue to unsettle and baffle Kian. Sharing his story with MUFON helped Kian contextualise his experience. While there are undoubtedly more elaborate cases out there, Kian's account stands out for its sudden and fleeting nature.